Today, we will talk about the time Mary I of England and Felipe II of Spain got married. Mary's passionate love for her husband is quite famous. So what was it about Felipe that made Mary fall in love with him so deeply? Let's look at this from Mary's perspective. First, let's meet the groom. Felipe was the eldest son of Holy Roman Emperor Karl V, who was also King Karl I of Spain. Emperor Karl was the son of Queen Juana, and we covered her story in one of our earlier videos. Karl's wife was Isabel of Portugal, who was the daughter of Manuel I of Portugal and Maria of Aragon, who was the sister of Karl's mother, Juana. Felipe was their eldest child. Karl had decided that Felipe would be raised in Spain. While Felipe feared his father, who ruled over much of Europe, he also deeply respected him. Karl was a serious and highly responsible ruler, and he was strict about teaching his son how to be a proper king. As expected, Felipe grew into a diligent and patient young man. Mary wasn't Felipe's first wife. At age 17, he married his cousin, Maria Manuela of Portugal, and Maria Manuela gave birth to Felipe's first son, Carlos. Unfortunately, she passed away just a few days after giving birth, and since then, Felipe remained single for a while. It was Emperor Karl who arranged for Mary to be Felipe's second wife. Royal marriage contracts were incredibly complex. For a queen, there is the question of how much power her husband, the king, would be allowed to exercise. And then, there's a matter of succession. Everything had to be meticulously negotiated. But Emperor Karl was very eager to make this marriage happen, so Felipe had to accept some rather disappointing terms. For example, while he would hold the title of King of England, the final decision-making power remained with Mary. His authority over state affairs was extremely limited. He wasn't even allowed to appoint any of his people from Spain to any offices. Looking at the contract, Felipe hesitated for a bit, wondering if he should go through with the marriage at all. But then, in the grand scheme of things, refusing didn't make much sense either. After all, if everything went as planned and Mary produces an heir, England would eventually come under Habsburg control. So Felipe decided that this was a good deal after all, and began preparing for the wedding. Mary had ascended the throne in 1553, and by that winter, the marriage negotiations were finalized. The wedding was scheduled for the following spring because Mary insisted on avoiding Lent. England set April as the target month and began making all the necessary preparations. But there were some unexpected delays from the Spanish side. Felipe had planned to leave for England right after Lent, but there was the issue of who would govern in his absence. His sister Maria was an option, but Maria fell unexpectedly ill. At that time, Maria was married to their cousin Maximilian, who later became Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II. The problem was, if Maria dies from her illness while Felipe was away, there would be a power struggle in Spain. So he had to stay to make sure Maria recovers from her illnesses before he could set off to England. But for the English side, this was a problem. All the preparations were done, but the groom was not coming. All sorts of wild rumors started spreading, like Felipe doesn't want to get married because Mary is too old. And this made Mary increasingly anxious and eager to have him arrive and get the marriage done. But then, whenever she appeared restless about the wedding, her ladies-in-waiting would tease her, saying, "Oh, do you miss your groom that much?" And every time her face would turn red. The truth was, although she was an older woman by the standards of that time, she had never been with a man before. So of course she was excited, nervous, and overwhelmed. And as the wait dragged on, she started longing for Felipe even though she hadn't even met him yet. The Spanish delegation that was supposed to arrive in early April didn't reach England until early June. They kept sending messengers saying, "Felipe will be here in 2 weeks." But he kept getting delayed, and in the end, it took another full month before he finally arrived in England on July 19th, 1554. As the Habsburg heir, Felipe had a big job to do. Taking control of England for the Habsburgs was no small task. First, he had to overcome the strong resistance of the English people. Winning over the English nobles and gaining the favor of the common people was crucial. Then, more importantly, he had to ensure that he and Mary produced a son who will establish the Habsburg rule over England. There were also other long-term goals. England had broken away from the Roman Catholic Church and established its own Church of England. Felipe's task was to bring it back under the authority of the Pope. On top of that, England and France were longtime enemies, and he had to ensure that England would actively fight against France. To accomplish his immediate goals, Felipe had to put forward the best face possible. He was naturally meticulous. When he had a task to do, he never left even the smallest detail unchecked. From the moment he set foot on English soil, he knew all eyes were on him. He made sure to act with humility and utmost courtesy, carefully crafting his image for the English people. The English were expecting him to be cold, arrogant, or even intimidating, but the person they faced shattered this expectation. The wedding was to take place in Winchester, and on the way there, heavy rain poured down. Riding on horseback in such weather was uncomfortable, but Felipe showed not even the slightest sign of displeasure. He smiled and greeted the English people along the route, winning them over with effortless grace. Felipe already had an impressive presence, but when he put in the extra effort, the impact was extraordinary. When the Spanish delegation had arrived ahead of Felipe, the atmosphere had been extremely hostile. People had thrown eggs and stones, shouting for them to leave. But when Felipe himself rode through England, he managed to shift the mood 180 degrees. His natural poise and charisma captivated the crowd. People were watching him in awe instead of hurling insults. Now, of course, all of these stories about Felipe and how he managed to charm the crowd and nobles along the way must have quickly reached Queen Mary. She was already excited about meeting him, but now she felt something even deeper, almost a strange sense of admiration. It was evening when Felipe arrived at Winchester for their first official meeting. He was dressed impeccably and headed to the bishop's residence. Mary was waiting anxiously. Now, let's imagine this moment from her perspective. She was sitting on the chair placed in the great hall, and she suddenly heard footsteps approaching. Would it be proper to stay seated, or should I greet him? She decided to greet Felipe as he ascended the stairs and quickly ran to the doorway. Some of her attendants rushed after her, caught off guard by her sudden movement. But his stride was faster than she expected. Just as she reached the doorway, Felipe entered, and the two nearly collided. For a brief moment, Mary was practically in his arms. She had already been so nervous that even while sitting, her heart was pounding and her breath was unsteady. Now she found herself in an even more overwhelming situation. But Felipe, ever composed, handled it with elegance. He was caught off guard when someone practically jumped into his arms, but he quickly realized it was Mary. Instantly he broke into a warm smile. Embarrassed, Mary stepped back and extended her hand in a formal manner, inviting him to kiss it, as was customary. But instead of bowing and kissing her hand, Felipe gently lowered her hand and gave her a light embrace. Then he kissed her on both cheeks, the way a groom would greet his bride, English style. It seemed Felipe knew exactly how to win hearts, and practiced this for their first meeting. The onlookers in the hall let out soft gasps of surprise and admiration, witnessing this graceful exchange. This unexpectedly tender and intimate greeting had completely caught Mary off guard, and her face turned red as a beet. Then Felipe took her hand and led her toward their seats, and she was already feeling lightheaded. When she managed to regain composure, she finally took a proper look at her husband. Felipe, just as the rumors had said, carried an air of refinement and authority. His forehead was high and broad, his eyes a striking shade of gray, and his nose sharp and well-defined. He was not particularly tall, but his physique was strong and well-toned from years of hunting and jousting. He exuded a quiet but undeniable masculinity. His golden hair and beard were immaculately groomed, complementing his lavish ceremonial attire. He was effortlessly elegant. The soon-to-be wed couple sat side by side on their seats and spoke for about 30 minutes. Both were fluent in multiple languages, and Mary could speak quite good Spanish. But to put the two on equal footing, they did not speak in either of their native languages, but spoke in Latin, which was the language of diplomacy at the time. Since it was already late at night, their first meeting was brief. But according to those present, Mary could hardly take her eyes off her husband the entire time. 2 days later, a grand wedding ceremony took place, marking the beginning of their married life. And, as time went on, Mary's love and admiration for Felipe only grew stronger. Felipe treated Mary with utmost respect, whether in private or in public. He was incredibly considerate in everything he did, and when they talked, he always listened attentively, never dismissing her words. Of course, Mary and Felipe had their differences, and at times they argued. But Felipe never forced his opinions over hers. Instead, he always listened attentively to his wife, the Queen. And this, and the stark contrast to her overbearing and stubborn father, was something Mary found most refreshing and admirable. Mary had grown up deprived of love. She lost her father's affection in her youth, and her mother had been taken away from her. For years, she had endured an existence starved of warmth and companionship. She had never once experienced romantic love or the joys of motherhood. And then, love seemed to have finally found her. At first, it felt unfamiliar, something she had never known, but it was perfect. Felipe was, after all, from her mother's homeland. He was also known as the protector of Catholicism, the faith Mary had devoted her life to. And, perhaps most importantly, he was the man destined to give her a Catholic heir who would secure the future of England as a Catholic kingdom. For the first time since her father had cast her aside, Mary felt truly happy. And so, filled with this newfound joy and purpose, she turned to the greatest mission that now consumed her heart and soul, both personally and also for her country, which was giving Felipe a son and giving England a Catholic heir. But that is a story for the next time.